What's everyone's thoughts on what's happening in Afghanistan Serious? I have a question about the arms and vehicles that the Taliban are capturing. Did the US leave those behind, or did the Afghan forces leave them when they surrendered, and I got them from the US, and then put them down when they surrendered? As far as I know, Taliban has said that anyone that surrenders with no fight will be let go unharmed, or given the chance to join them. It's the that fight back that will get no quarter. So right now, ANA's soldiers are surrendering left and right, while the special forces and commandos are fighting back. They probably know that surrender will result in executions. Gaining power isn't always dependent on having the support of the majority. It seems to me that the Taliban is winning because they are more unified and have better loyalty and morale. It doesn't matter much how many are against the Taliban, if they can't organize into a coherent group to oppose them. The Afghan National Army can't stand against them if the soldiers lack confidence in their commanders, or if the NCOs do a poor job of maintaining discipline and keeping the respect of those under them, or if soldiers lack belief in the competence and resolve of the rest of the army. Once the army falls apart, as it seems to be have done, then there is no organized group to coordinate anti-Taliban activities, until some grassroots rebellion forms. For the moment, for an anti-Taliban Afghan, the options are basically to grab a rifle and take pot shots at any Taliban you see until they inevitably find and kill you, or keep your head down and try to keep yourself and your family safe. Unsurprisingly, the first option seems unattractive to most people. Why is it that the fundamentalists can gain this much control over the people? If the people don't want to live like this, why can't the people, with help from others, fight back to get to a life that they desire? I'd say a key point here is probably the weakness of the central government and their lack of cohesiveness. The main fighting force against the Taliban appears to have basically given up, despite in many cases having superior resources and equipment to their opponents. Why is it that the fundamentalists can gain this much control over the people? If the people don't want to live like this, why can't the people, with help from others, fight back to get to a life that they desire? And what is the end goal of the Taliban ownership over Afghanistan, when even within this group, there is constant infighting? I'm curious to get your thoughts, because your points are well thought out, and I'd love to get opinions based on strong knowledge of the area. My ancestry is not too far from there, so I understand the cultures somewhat, but I still can't wrap my head around what the people want, desire, why they can't get to that point, and what the Taliban's end goal is. Because it feels like their goal is to kill every Afghani and then some. That Afghanistan isn't some homogeneous or uniform country, where everyone will unite against Taliban. Some people will be staunchly pro-Taliban, others will be anti-Taliban. It's impossible for us Westerners to put ourselves in their shoes, which is unfortunately why bringing democracy to such countries is almost always a non-starter to begin with. Yes, I think it is unfortunate that hardcore fundamentalists will be able to control the daily lives of so many different people, but in all honesty, what can you do without breaking up a country? Might not be politically correct, but Afghanistan is a tribal, Islamist society and has been for centuries. It is never going to be a democratic modern state in any of our lifetimes. While it was reasonable to clear out Al-Qaeda from the country, we had no business being there 20 years. Eventually we were going to have to leave. It was just a question of how many more billions of dollars and American lives were wasted in the meantime. I was skeptical of Biden when he came in as president, but I have been enormously impressed how he has stood up to the pressure and been willing to see this through. Cutting your losses never looks good, but it is often the smart decision. No government installed by an invader is likely to garner the support of the people. This wasn't the Civil War where the US sided with the good guys. It wasn't helping an ally with rebel forces. We invaded. picked a leader, wondered why it didn't work, what would we have done tomorrow, next week, next year that is any different than what we have been doing for 20 years. Yes, we broke it. Doesn't mean we can fix it. That's why you don't just have a shoot from the hip response. Heard a lot of talking heads saying we can't suddenly implement our way of governance on a nation. It took us centuries to develop our systems and institutions. We can't just expect our systems to thrive in a country where people are divided along tribal lines instead of national ones and where corruption is rife. The current Bistov as a top post on Afghanistan, it seems articulate, well thought out and from a legitimate position of experience, unlike most of the answers you've received. A big difference here is that those countries you listed were fairly advanced in society development and culture, to the point of having a centralized government and national identity with perceivable and mostly recognized geographical borders, plus functional strong economy and infrastructures, or at least the knowledge and experience on how to build them in the first place and how to rebuild after getting bombed to dust. Afghanistan is a region with its borders drawn pretty much haphazardly if not arbitrarily by foreign power, consisting of loosely connected tribes, with no clear common national identity, and its economy and infrastructure were never really that good to begin with. Things just can't work the same, not without a few centuries for the changes to really take root in people's collective mindset, edit, grammar and word choice. Scale, of course not, but buildings can be rebuilt, babies can be produced, investments can be made. What is harder to overcome is when people have lived in a war zone their entire lives, as have their parents, little cultural memory of peace, and the notion of picking up a gun to settle disagreements, both civil and political, doesn't seem unusual. Even within a fascist society, the people are generally law-abiding, they cooperate, and generally consider the government and military to have a monopoly on violence. Democracy and the rule of law are not synonymous. I don't think the scale of rebuilding in WIA should be underestimated. A lot of these nations had been ravaged by the war to the point where they were basically failed states with no basic governance whatsoever. Some also had very limited experience with democracy in the past, as well as largely rural populations who weren't necessarily all that knowledgeable when it came to politics. I wonder if the timetable paradox has more to do with this than culture. In all those countries the US built permanent bases and basically committed to sitting there forever, which is what prevented Communist China and Russia from taking over. I think the Cold War would have gone way differently if the US looked like it would leave within 20 years of WIA because it was tired. The unfortunate thing about forever wars is that commitment to fighting them is just about the only way to end the fighting, which is why the US has a permanent presence all over the world. I am not saying that we should have offered Afghanistan the same treatment, but short of glassing Pakistan for training and sheltering the Taliban, the only way to stop the fighting would have been to scorch earth the Taliban out of Afghanistan with another surge, then plop a permanent presence on the border and threaten retaliation to anyone crossing it. I don't think the Biden administration had the political capital for such action. People wanted out, of course. A growing number of people want out of the rest of the US's commitments too. And US allies regularly shit themselves throughout the Trump administration over fears that the US might stop providing permanent protection. Now Russia is testing the waters in Europe and China is saber-rattling around Taiwan. And if the US's isolationist streak ever causes us to withdraw from our other commitments, we might learn the hard way that much of the world is one broken promise away from being Afghanistan. Timetables for a military objective just give enemies a time limit to wait it out, but even permanent presence is just a timetable based on perceived patience. Most of the worst actors on the international stage believe they will see the US blink before their dictatorships or terrorist organizations lose funding. The comparison to we is not appropriate because those countries were unified polities with a common culture, value system. Afghanistan and Iraq are literally pieces of the map. Various cultural and religious factions cobbled together by the British over a century ago. The only thing that unifies these states is a strong military power, police state. You take that away, and then you get another round of civil war until the new strongman emerges. World War II is often cited by many people as being the model, and it's not bad, but General Marshall's plan had one distinct feature. Both Germany and Japan were industrial powers, and along with the rest of the industrialized world, were able to rebuild. Afghanistan was a marginal industrial state, but that was so long ago it clearly doesn't matter. The whole concept of nation-state doesn't really play here. Pashto, Harati, Tajik, Taliban, Sunni, Shia all mixed, and sometimes in violent combination. And this is the major defect in not just the thinking of the United States, but in the thinking of every foreign interest that has come here to get their arrogance checked for the last couple of thousand years. So maybe, and I'm just spitballing here, we should take a hard and serious look at what we have. The Pashto and other tribes are resilient in a way that has endured every imperial ambition since antiquity, and so maybe it's worthwhile to ask these people what they want for themselves. Ask around, see what is agreeable to them. That's why the Taliban are so fucking successful here, is that they play to all the notional values that are attractive to the tribal powers that exist here. Those tribal powers aren't interested in perhaps any of the values of Western society, but they do have interests. The United States has a variety of good and virtuous things in its society, but not all of them translate at all. So take giving women rights or introducing programming and high-tech consumer society to individuals who might never earn in a decade enough money to buy a laptop or an iPhone. And far more unfathomable and disturbing to Western thinkers, is that these folks might have absolutely no interest in doing so, ever. So as the Taliban reasserts itself, it's a very dark time for Afghani young people and Afghani women in particular. What might be required for places like Afghanistan or Africa, or Indonesia, or interior China and India and every other place in the world, is to first listen very carefully to what the people in those places want. What are they interested in? And perhaps most importantly, what don't they care about? This forces us then to confront another serious concern, which is to wonder, what about women's rights, prisoner rights or child slavery or whatever other item that is of critical importance to folks in the Western world? What Afghanistan has taught us ... if we are wise, is that there are real cultural limits to the virtues of Western society, not because the women and sympathetic culture of Afghanistan might not want those ideals, but rather that nobody took the time, the long, decades and decades long time to slowly change the culture of the Afghani tribes, from the inside out, rather from the outside in. And we know that resisting outside-in change is something the Afghani people are perhaps supremely resistant to that sort of change. So if one fine day the elderly leader of some Pashto tribe emerges from her tribe's madrasa to head over to the tax office to discuss industrial credits for the new microprocessor plant in Herat, with the iTablet 45 with her digitally autographed copy of iProgramming and Linux as translated by one of the scholars at the school, we'll know it was because that Pashto tribes had chosen to embrace those changes, and not a moment before. I'd also add that just like with us here, or any human, bad things reverberate much more than good. Your best friend can be a good person to you for 20 years. But if he cheats on you with your wife once, it's all wiped away. Same principle applies. Like you said, you can build 20 hospitals, but you drone a wedding party and no one will give a shit about the hospitals. Look up the number of civilian casualties. The problem with doing good things while accidentally killing hundreds of thousands of civilians is you're still killing hundreds of thousands of civilians while doing them. I'm unlikely to care much that you built a hospital in a neighboring province when my entire extended family was just blown up in a drone strike or mowed down by a helicopter-mounted minigun. For example, if a serial killer donates the majority of their salary to charity for decades, they're still a serial killer. The good doesn't come close to canceling out the bad. It has to be a nation first. Afghanistan might be a country with certain geographical location with people who live there generally seen as Afghanis, but inside it's several tribes essentially spread over the countryside with very little willingness to interact with outsiders or change. Building infrastructure works when you have people a majorly city-dwelling industrialized society that actually needs that infrastructure to survive. Didn't matter though. Even if we did everything perfect in Afghanistan, it would still be a failure. Nations need to choose to democratize and modernize from within. It's like trying to get an addict to quit when they don't want to. We did a shitload of that in Afghanistan. We built hundreds of schools and hospitals all over the country. We mainly only blew shit up to prevent fundamentalist dickheads from burning those schools and hospitals down. I think a lot of people completely forget that not all societies and cultures are distilled from the same source. That is post-Roman Empire Europe with the Roman law as basis and the centuries of cultural, political and societal intermixing. Japan was isolated for over 150 years and its culture is far from the Christian type that most European countries are. Same goes for China. They have a much longer history of being a country, of having certain cultural norms than pretty much everyone else, and it doesn't matter if they call themselves the Communist Party or Kings or Republic. The way the people in power in China operate doesn't seem to change much. Same goes for a lot of other countries which don't trace their lineage back to Roman Empire. Trouble is, Afghanistan isn't America. I don't mean that in a good or bad way. It just is that way. Someone on Reddit previously posted about how the Afghan culture has not gone through the 800 years of struggle from the Magna Carta in England leading up to the formation of the USA with its own history and internal trials and tribulations. Afghan society is still largely as it has been for likely 1,000 years. You can't just drop a whole bunch of foreign expectations distilled down over centuries onto a country and expect them to embrace it in the span of a few years. This is why military might can't fix most of the world's problems. Equipping and training a native army doesn't help if the local government doesn't have the political capital and resources to build government structures that can support and supply the general population and the army. I feel awful for this young Afghan girl deported a few years back after being in the country for 4 years, Norway. I believe one of the arguments were that the situation wasn't dangerous enough to argue against deportation. Her parents had lied on the asylum application. Thought of her when I read the news frown. I'm sure many people would love to put the blame on someone in the executive branch, be it Biden or Trump or Bush or whomever, but really, this is the best answer. It was inevitable. History has taught us this. The Afghan terrain mixed with knowledge of terrain and how to manipulate, terrorize until they get what they want. The local population meant the Taliban could hide, work underground for years and simply resurface once the foreign militaries pulled out. Pretty sure everyone was a bit surprised it only took 2 weeks, but other than that, yeah, inevitable. Other than nuking the whole country, which no one is suggesting is a good idea, and starting over in 10 years, I've never heard a plan that I thought would remotely have a chance at working. I had a classmate in my nursing program from Afghanistan. She was a wonderful person and had some horrible stories to tell about the Taliban. This was in 2012. She was so happy that things were safer. I think about her and her family right now and I feel so sad and worried for the people affected. I feel really awful for the servicemen and women who were there and risked their lives just to see this happen. I'm just really sad and heartbroken. The Taliban has made that practice illegal, allegedly. I'd get the exact term bash or something, but the Taliban has made pederasty illegal. They are okay with 12-year-old girls being ripped away from their families to be given to fighters as rape slaves, but violating a little boy goes against their male honor code, I guess.